Good evening. This is podcast number 17. I am the Great Jew Atheist, and please comment, like this video, and email me. I could be emailed at thegreatjewatheist@gmail.com. Again, that is thegreatjewatheist@gmail.com. Today's topic is evolution, and the subtopic is evolution for fundamentalists. Supplementary reading materials is the greatest show on earth, The Case for Evolution by Richard Dawkins, okay? So today we're going to try to present the case for evolution to you fundamentalists. So at this point, we've already talked about two things. We talked about why Noah's Ark is bullshit and why the Earth cannot be 10,000 years old. And I gave you through carbon-14 dating, it has to be at least 50,000 years old. And it really, in actuality, is a 4.5 billion years old. And that is an order of magnitude of tremendous. I think Richard Dawkins said that that's like going from here to San Francisco. It would be 8 yards or something. So it's tremendous idiocy. Okay, let's start the presentation. And we start the presentation with Evolution 101. So here's some basic concepts of evolution. Okay, so evolution is generated by competition, all right? So there's a demand by organisms for limited environmental resources, such as nutrients, living space, or light. Okay, so there's very limited means. Organisms are born and there's not much out there, and so there's not to live. It's not easy. We take for granted as human beings. We're born, we have mothers, and we get certain things. We grow up, and most of us, not all of us, some are homeless, and we get mostly we get by. All right, the second thing is adaptation. Inherited characteristics that increase our chance of survival. And one of the types of phylum, for instance, birds. Birds, for instance, have a great adaptation. They can fly. And most birds, there's a few. The kiwi bird, I think, and the ostrich, penguin. But most birds can fly, and that's a great thing if you could fly, because if someone's chasing you, a predator's chasing you, you could fly away. Now, it always doesn't work, because some predators, some cats, for example, could jump great distances, and some predators can stalk you. But flight is a great adaptation, and many insects have it too, and they developed it because some pre-bird-like species didn't survive, and some birds eventually figured it out. Well, they didn't figure it out. There was a mutation, and little by little, over a long period of time, they began to fly. Okay, so the next thing is variation. The occurrence of an orgasm is more than one distinct color or form. And the example we're going to talk about is the peppered moth. And we're going to talk about that a little later. So we'll leave that for later. Overproduction. More organisms are produced than can live. And the best example of this is cockroaches. Now, cockroaches aren't particularly have many great adaptations. They're not that the fastest. Could kill them pretty easily. But one thing they do have is they produce many offspring. And they're hard to get rid of, as I know, living in my apartment. So, and that's one thing. Most species will produce many offspring, knowing that, well, they don't know. Genetically, knowing that the genes know that they will not all survive. And if you produce 100, maybe 20 or 10 will survive. And most will perish due to predation, disease, starvation. Okay? And the last part of Evolution 101 is speciation. The formation of a new species is a result of geographic, anatomical, behavioral factors from a species that formerly was able to continue and breed. Now, an excellent example is the lion and tiger, which are very, very similar. Now, lions and tigers were about a million years ago, came from a common ancestor, and somehow they were separated, and one became adapted to the savanna, and one became adapted to a forest type environment, and they became a little different. You know, by the way, they could still mate. If you Google liger, Liger, and they can have offspring, but the offspring are usually not viable. They can't have their offspring of their own. So speciation can result in geographic, like an earthquake could separate species, and you know, they can live under different environments over a long period of time. Anatomical, you know, let's say, you know, rodents are very similar, and maybe, you know, the rodents can't mate anymore because they're one's too big for another. So they, you know, become different species over time. And all kinds of different things can happen. And again, one of the important things, as we'll talk about, is evolution happens over long periods of time. Okay, examples of evolution. So what are some good examples of evolution? And these are, you know, many of them are really quick. You know, evolution happens usually hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. And but these are really good examples of evolution to show that evolution is not a theory, it's a fact. Just as much of a fact as that the sun rises, the earth revolves around the sun. And 2 + 2 is equal to 4. The peppered moth, okay? Now the peppered moth became more prominent in industrial England because the soot of a factory gave him camouflage advantage. Now, before industrial England, what happened? What was the situation? Now the situation was a white moth was more popular, and there was a mutation called the pepper moth, and it wasn't really too big. You know, it wasn't too big. So the Industrial Revolution happened, and in England, and what happened was there was a lot of soot, and predators would now take the white moths more often. So, let me get rid of this. So the predators would take the white moths more often, and the black peppered moths, or the darker moths, would survive more often. So because of this change in environment, the peppered moth became more prevalent. Okay, so that's one example. Italian wall lizard. Scientists in Italy about 25 years ago purposely took about 10 of these lizards from Italy and changed an island they were on to a different island. And they went from an insectivorous island, which is a diet of insects, to vegetation. They developed a larger head and greater bite force, and this happened in about 20 years. They developed cecal valves, that's like a valve in their intestine, which slowed plant materials to give time for digestion by bacteria. So this became a different species within a time frame that human beings could see. The dodo bird. The dodo bird is an example of extinction. Now, the dodo bird survived quite well for a long period of time. It was found only on the island of Mauritius. It was a flightless bird that had lost its wings because it wasn't needed, because they weren't needed. Okay? Now, you might say, well, why lose your wings? Well, you know, remember, wings come at a cost, right? If you have wings, they come at a cost. So if you don't need them, why have them? You're on an island and no predators on the island. That's why you need wings, because they're predators. They're going to come and eat you, right? So why have them? They're going to come at a cost. You know, you're going to expend more energy. And so why have them? So the dodo birds that didn't have wings, or their ancestors, survived, and the other ones flew away. You know? When explorers came to discover the island on Mauritius, they introduced cats, which became feral. So they became wild, these cats. These cats decimated the defenseless dodo population, which had no protection from the predators, and they went extinct. So here's another example of how evolution, how human beings can affect evolution. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about types of selection. Now there are three types of selection. Artificial, sexual, and natural selection. Let's talk about artificial selection first. Process by which humans use specific traits for animals and plant breeding to produce desired characteristics. Now, interesting enough, this is how Darwin started to come up with his theory. He saw dogs, for example, came in many different breeds, and he noticed that, and he said, it's interesting. All kinds of huge dogs, small dogs, but they were all essentially dogs. They had this a common behavior. So examples, seedless grapes. How did seedless grapes? That's what grapes are for. Grapes are for to reproduce, right? That's what a grape is. It's an ovary. Once in a while, by mutation, a grape won't have a seed. And people discovered it, and what they did was they took this grape and they replanted it, and they made a graft, and his genetics survived, and now today we have seedless grapes. Who needs a seed, right? And dogs, of course, over thousands, tens of thousands of years were bred for different things, like temperament, speed for greyhounds, bloodhounds, and were for their scent, and bulldogs, and pit bulls, and German Shepherd for protection value. So, all kinds of was selected, and their offspring would be similar, of course. It's an interesting experiment. This Russian scientist, he started this process. He eventually passed away, and what he did is took wild foxes, and he took the tamest one, kept on breeding them, kept on getting tamer ones, and the foxes totally changed from being wild to being almost like dogs. Now, these foxes eventually were relocated after the Russian scientist passed to California, and they're now kept. And they even wag their tail like dogs. They grow ears, and they've changed the way they look. And they're not yet dogs totally, but it's amazing what 30 years have done to these foxes that are near. They're not domesticated yet. They're not totally, but it's going to take a little time. It's going to probably take another 10, 20 generations, which in dog years is about 50 to 100 years, but eventually you're going to have pet foxes, Okay, so then we talk about sexual selection. Selection arising through preferences for one sex, certain characteristics in individuals of the other sex. So examples are peacocks. Peacocks, of course, peafowl, I call. One of the common things, I always make fun of people, is that they're called peafowl. There are two types of peafowl. A female is called a peahen, and the male is called a peacock. And we all know the peacock with the amazing tail feathers, right? And the peahen, not so amazing tail feathers. And the peacock has these amazing tail feathers because the females over generations have selected them for this. And one of the big puzzles is this puts the peacocks, of course, at disadvantage because the more you grow out the peacocks, it puts the peahens selecting these peacocks, and puts them at disadvantage, of course, because now they can't run away from predators. They can't fly. They fly a little bit like a chicken. They can't fly very well. And the theory basically is they're showing they have such good genes that they grow such beautiful feathers that they're selected. Bowerbirds are another example of sexual selection. The bowerbirds build a fancy nest, the male bowerbird, and it's called a bower. And before the female mates with the male, she'll check it out, and only the males that build the best nest or bower will get to mate. By the way, one thing that human females will love about birds is they're basically monogamous. So you'll like that. And elks, of course, many mammals, especially herbivore species, they fight a lot and they have evolved huge horns in a display. And it's basically the female elk have selected this. And again, that could come at a cost too. Because again, if you have these huge, huge horns, this might cause some, problems in terms of running away when there's no lions, but could be predation by wolves or something like that. So probably a similar thing, the peacocks. I have such good genes, I can even have these big horns. I'm at a disadvantage, but the rest of my genes are so good. Okay, natural selection. Now, so Darwin basically said that from artificial, he didn't really, he actually touched on later about sexual selection, but his ideas from natural selection came from his visit to Galapagos Islands and artificial selection. So he came up with this theory of natural selection, and his basic idea that organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and reproduce more offspring, right? And since this process happens over thousands, hundreds, thousands of 2 million years, it's hard to see. And I think that's, most of the reason why people can't accept this as a fact. And a lot of dumbness. You're dumb. If you can't see evolution, you're dumb. And the next slide and the last slide is basically common sense. You just have to be really stupid. I don't think you just want to hold on to your religion so much that you want to attack evolution, but it's not something, you're backed into a corner, and you try to, okay, so now you've got the whole Bible at this point taken away from you. And so you've got very little left. So you could basically say now at this point, since evolution has to be a fact, there's no way around it. In fact, the last thing we'll talk about is common sense. Okay, so evolution, so I've got the fact of evolution through, and I'm going to talk about one more thing, why it's a fact through common sense, and, it's just a fact. And we talked about the reasons, but so basically at this point you're backed into a corner, and basically the only thing you could say that the Bible isn't literally true, it's a book of fables, but the New Testament is true, and that Jesus did all these miracles, and now you're really shaking around. Like you're almost to the point where you're ready to fall off the cliff. So now we're really ready to go to the crux of the matter, is to really prove once and for all that there's really no God. Of course there isn't, but at this point, you just got to be stupid. Okay, so let's go to the last slide. Okay, so I call this my arguments from common sense. Okay, so let's say, we didn't even talk about the previous reasons, the facts of evolution. What is some common sense reasons? Like, how can I persuade you that it's, I just gave you some amazing facts. What is some common sense? What does common sense tell you? Well, the more closely related the organism is, the more similar it is. For instance, human and apes. Like, for instance, chimpanzees and humans share 98.4% of their DNA. So only 1.6% of their deoxyribonucleic acid, I think, is different. You fundamentalists probably don't understand that, but I can't even pronounce myself, so I'm kind of a moron. Just look at rodents. Come on. Look at a hamster and a mouse. I saw some rats on the subway today. I was looking at like 3 rats, and I was just looking at my hamsters, and I'm saying, God, you guys are rats. They're just so similar looking. They're so closely related. Fish and amphibians is such a logical progression from a fish to an amphibian. Just see it. The fish lives in the water exclusively. An amphibian is part fish when he's young as a fish, and when he has gills, it's a tadpole, and when he gets out, he gets old enough, and whatever that is, I don't know, maybe 6 months, he becomes a frog or a toad or a newt or whatever. And he grows lungs, you know. So you can see, you know, it just makes sense, you know. So, so you don't have to make an intellectual leap to see that species that are very similar, you know, are very closely related. It's just common sense. Now, you know, one other interesting thing about a lot of people don't understand evolution. They think, oh, we didn't come from monkeys, but see, that is assumed an anthropomorphic view of life, that we're at the top of the food chain, that everything comes to us. That's not true. You know, we are only a part of that. So we are us, and if you go back far enough, you could trace the common ancestor of us to any species. Like you can go back and find the common ancestor to us in elephants. Now, Richard Dawkins always talks, what would it look like? It'd probably be more close looking to an elephant, you know? You don't know though. I mean, you don't know. Like he said, like what's common ancestors between a human and a chimpanzee? It probably look like more like a chimpanzee or an ape, maybe. You know, it's hard to say. Organisms share similar organs. Now, this makes common sense. Fish and humans have livers. Like, ever hear cod liver oil? So I'm assuming, you know, again, I don't know fish anatomy. I'm no ichthyologist, you know, whatever that's pronounced. You ever hear cod liver oil? So cod is a type of fish and it has a liver. And I know humans have livers because I'm an alcoholic, you know, so I know these things. So why would God do that? You know, I'm gonna make a plan. He's up in his computer. You know, you think if God made Adam and Eve, he would made them with computers already? Humans and hamsters have kidneys. You know, I don't know if I open up my hamsters one day, which I won't do. They both have kidneys. You know, I saw this sick thing on the internet. I was saying, you know, hamsters. You know, I was petting my hamsters, and I said, "Well, I have such nice furs. I wonder." Nah, no one could do this. I wonder if they sell hamster coats, fur coats. Sure enough, they sell hamster fur coats. I've definitely lost all faith in humanity. Lions and crocodiles have blood. Although I think reptiles have green blood. You know, they have a different type of hemoglobin or something like that. So isn't that odd? They would use. By the way, their heart is. You know, the crocodiles have a interesting heart. I think, or crocodilians, and alligators and crocodiles and caimans and gavials. I think, you know, they study and try to find it because their hearts are very good. And, you know, another interesting thing is, you know, talking as fundamentalists and talking about how poorly we're designed. The Creator, God or Jesus has created us. Why would he make our hearts so bad? Oh, no, he made us perfect. Yeah, then why do we get heart attacks? Why does the arteries clog up, you know? Oh, it's choice. You know, he gave us a choice. Why did he give us a choice? You know, they have heart attacks. Fundamentals, nutty. Okay. Nearly all living things have DNA. So basically, every single thing has this deoxyribonucleic acid. You know, all living, just designed by it. And I guess God found a substance. It's a good thing. You know, he uses this complicated molecule, double helix, and no one knew about till 1954. Crick and Watson, I guess, right? The only exception to this is, I think, is RNA. I could be wrong. No scientist, no biologist. And the reason why RNA, they're not quite living. They're about half between living and non-living. So they might not be considered to be a living being. So that's why they might have this. Now, the final interesting thing. Well, one of the things since 2000, this is kind of not used anymore. You know, a lot of scientists are kind of, but I find it an interesting thing still. And I first read about this, and I just got this book legally, wink, wink, from the internet. Carl Sagan's Dragons of Eden. It's such a great book. I mean, it's a little out there. You know, it's like that friend who's entertaining, but it's one of his more out there books. And you know, one of the things. he talks about this scientist, Paul MacLean, modeled the human brain, and he said it had three parts, basically. And basically, the file we're in is called the chordates. And basically, the model was, there's three parts: the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and neocortical brain. They're all laid up on top of each other. Now, again, I think since 2000, scientists have now, not many, maybe a few still go guess, but I think it's a really good model. So they're laid up one on top of the other. So you take one, you got a mammal, take one off, you take the cortex, which is, most higher mammals have like elephants, chimpanzees, probably dogs. You take it off, you get a rat. You take another one off, you get a crocodile or a snake. The reptilian, primitive emotions and, things like that, anger and, ability to see danger and this things like, dominance hierarchies probably is in the mammalian brain. And so really, I think I really hit the nail on the coffin tonight, and I really put you a creationist in the coffin, but it won't matter. I was saying to the the fundamentalist guy, I said, even I could prove to you with a shadow of a doubt that there was no God, and you agreed, you still believe in God, because, why? I mean, it's just, there's no God, it's not there, He's not coming. He's nowhere. He's just a figment of your imagination. There's no evidence. Where is your evidence? Where is your God? Right? If there was a God, I'd be dating Kim Kardashian. But there's no God. Okay, so that concludes this podcast. It's October 26, 2018. I'm the Great Jude Atheist. You have a wonderful evening. Thank you and good night.